or false? What's your question? Another 10 seconds or so. Okay, 5 more seconds. Get them in. All right. Where did I drop off last time? Who's next? Who's?
You're last, so I'm next.
You're next? Okay, you're next. What'd you put?
Arbitrator.
Okay. Why Arbitrator?
Because the first case we read, that was the wrong that I found it.
Okay. What again is the police power? Remind us.
It's the federal government gives states the powers to make laws and police power.
Well, the federal government has nothing to do with it. What is the police power? No, what's the police power?
It comes from the state and it goes down to like legislation for cities or
Good. And what does the police power allow the states and the cities to do?
to zoning laws and regulate.
More broadly, what does the police power entail?
Just to regulate or to be able to do stuff like taking.
There are 4 specific things, right? Lila, what are those 4 things? We've talked about them before.
Morals, health, safety.
Yeah, good. Health, safety, welfare, moral. Very good. So the notion of the police power are these 4 general heads, right? Delilah is regulating appearance of property, or you might say aesthetics, within the police power. Okay? Okay. So why is regulating aesthetics and appearance under the welfare aspect? Oh, now you said something else, right? My question had nothing to do with property values. It was appearance by itself. Oh, Anna, what did you put?
I said true.
You said true. You said true. Okay. You went for false. Yeah, Lindsay.
I put false.
Why?
Well, because I didn't think it was within the police power. Like, they don't just look at aesthetics, they'll look at other things like property value, declining and all that. So it's not within the police power. They also have to look at other stuff.
Anyone else? False? Yeah, I see.
I put false also.
How come?
It seems that aesthetics is a purely subjective thing. So we learned from the other day that you cannot make decisions or ordinances that seem arbitrary.
Arbitrary. What does that mean, arbitrary? What does that word mean? It's a good word.
Random?
Yeah, random. Right? Anyone else want to add anything? Let's see what the results are. Let's see how this one shook out. Wow. I think the answer is false. I think you're all wrong. But I asked this question deliberately. So by now you should pay very close attention to the way I frame questions. I like true or false because it forces you to pick a side. You can't just go, oh, A, B, C, D, right? It forces you to pick a side. Look how I framed the question, right? Under the police power, a city can regulate the appearance of property. In the first case, which we'll read in a minute, the appearance by itself was not enough. It was appearance because it affects, Delilah said it, Lindsay said it, the value of property, right? I don't think the courts have held that the way something looks by itself is within the police power, right? You can't say, wow, that building's ugly, so that affects our welfare. No, 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 no. What affects our welfare is diminishing property values in a given neighborhood, right? So 97% of you got this answer wrong, but I'm glad you did. It's better to get it wrong here than on the exam. So we're all friends here, it's not graded. But this just raises and begs another question, right, Avery? Why is protecting property values within the police power? right? This, we're just begging the question, right? What about preserving and protecting property values is from the police power?
Well, if the property value goes down, and people aren't going to want to live there or build businesses there,
Why not?
because the property won't be valuable to them in the long run when they try to.
So
sell.
Avery, let me ask you this question. What does, I ask it differently. If the government can do stuff to preserve property values, what limit exists on that power?
I think they have to have a reason to believe that whatever they're trying to regulate would lower the property value.
Now, name tag? Mike, how do you know if something will increase or decrease property values? How can anyone know that in advance? Now, Avery said they have to have a reason for the property values to go up or down. How solid does that reason have to be, or how certain does that reason have to be? Well, that's a good answer, but how certain does it have to be? What if they turn out to be wrong, right? What if, you build some funky looking house and it's like, wow, this is beautiful, and then it starts a new, fashion craze, everyone has these weird looking station houses. But you have to have a specific certainty that allowing certain things to be built would actually decrease property values. No, it wasn't the right. I asked the question, yes or no.
Do you have to have certain?
Yeah.
I would assume you have to have a basis for saying this is going over property value.
Isaac, I think I know what you're going to say here.
Rational basis?
Yeah. All you need is a rational basis, that's right. If there's some conceivable way that allowing this construction to be built would result in the diminishment of property values, under the case law, that's enough. You don't have to be certain. You certainly don't have to be right. But if you have some rational basis why you're right, that's enough. So then, Jesse will ask you the question I asked before. If all you need is some rational basis that this could impact property values, is there any limit on the police power here? Right? Is there anything that they can't do under the aesthetics, because property value is the underlying criteria?
On a rational basis, the person bringing the action would have to prove that there is no rational basis at all, which is
Right.
also
Can anyone make that? Can anyone meet that burden?
can, it's very hard.
Right. So the general rule is, right, once you connect aesthetics to property values, the government has a virtually unlimited license to tell you how to run your property. Right? Once you say that, if we build this funky looking house here, it's going to make things ugly and it's going to, ruin the neighborhood and diminish property values, that's basically a blank check to the government. It's a blank check. They can define that as they wish. Come on, I'm about to give a caveat to that in a minute, but go for it.
So what if that makes the answer to the question true?
No,
So you can regulate that then?
but it's not just for appearance, it's for property values.
But they can
So you can regulate the appearance as long as it's for property.
Yes.
So
So it's not just
No, it's not.
it doesn't say only or.
Can. Is that a true statement?
Yeah.
No. If you read the case from Washington, the court rejects that as a true statement. We'll look at the Washington case in a minute. They reject that as a true statement.
What about the Penn Central case for historic preservation? Wouldn't that be
Will-
solely for aesthetics?
We'll get to Penn Central and something that we can do. But historical preservation is not about aesthetics. It's maintaining the characteristics of the neighborhood, which is not pure aesthetics. Right? You're fighting it, you're not. There's a sentence in the Washington case where they said, the plaintiffs say that as a general rule, the government can regulate aesthetics. We find that not to be the case. True means true in all of its applications, not maybe true in some cases. So pay attention to how they're phrased, very, very deliberately. Yeah.
You open attendance, it never let me.
Why are you asking me this now?
Because when you told us to
It was already open. Ask me after class. Yeah, and 25 people checked in. So, general, if you're late, you don't get to check in. All right, that's the rule. Please don't ask me that again. You are here, so we can check you in later. Okay. So, we have here a situation, right, where the government can regulate property values, And so long as aesthetics are connected to property values, then the government can have these aesthetics. But that does not mean that it's an unlimited power. Because when regulating the appearance, there are certain limitations, right? There are certain limitations on how they can decide what looks like appropriate and what looks inappropriate. Now, Caitlin, where do those limitations come from, as illustrated in at least the first or second case today?
They say that it can't be arbitrary and it can't be unreasonable.
Very good. And then what provision of law gives courts the power to determine if something's arbitrary or unreasonable?
What provision of law?
Yeah, pretty big one.
Not sure. I mean, somewhere in the Constitution.
Yeah, it's in the Constitution. So what provision is it? We've been talking about it now for a couple classes.
The takings? No.
Well, it could be the takings. That's not what I'm thinking of. What's the other provision we've talked about?
Oh, the first case, yeah, due process.
Due process clause, exactly right. The due process clause of the 14th Amendment says that nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. Right? Paige, why is this relevant to our discussion today, right? What about some of these laws that were discussed in the cases run afoul of the 14th Amendment?
Because you have the city boards that are saying that the property owners, the developers, local property.
Right, but why are those ordinances problematic? What about them is problematic?
I guess because they, like overreach.
Well, Paige, let me ask the question differently. What does the due process of law require, right? In order for one of these aesthetic laws to be valid, what does the due process clause require about this ordinance? Right, and what would deprive a person of life, liberty, or your property? What about the ordinance would be a deprivation of that property interest? Travis? Well, why were these ordinances maybe not so easy to follow? I think you're on the right track. How would you describe that standard? Is it specific? How would you describe it? Did you say objective or subjective? Okay. What's another synonym for subjective? If you're trying to follow, say you're an architect or something, right? How would you know what to do here? Would you know what to do? So what do we call such a standard? What's the word I'm looking for?
Vague.
Thank you. Vague. Vague. That's exactly right. V-A-G-U-E. Vague. And there's a standard under the 14th Amendment. What's called the void for vagueness doctrine. Void for vagueness doctrine. And it says like this: people have a right to know what the laws are. There was an ancient Roman emperor, I think it was Nero, and he would put the laws on a piece of paper, and then he would put this piece of paper on top of a very high column, right? So that no one could see it. He's like, see, the laws are posted, right? But they were on such a high column that no one could see it. It's as if the laws didn't even matter. So we have this a bedrock principle in our legal system that the law has to be knowable. And if a reasonable person goes to the law books and starts reading a statute, they should know what is and is not expected of them. This is why you have this maxim in criminal law that you no doubt study, that ignorance of the law is no excuse, right? You study this. But that maxim is premised on the idea that the laws are knowable, that they can be known, right? But what happens if you have a statute that is so vague that no one can know what the law is, right? Who knows what interesting means, right? Who knows what, aesthetically pleasing means? Who knows what harmonious means, right? These are standards that are, I think as Travis said, subjective. Not objective, subjective. In that different people interpreting this rule will come out in completely different ways. And what the cases today illustrate is there's no good way to know in advance what your construction is supposed to look like. And even if you try and take their guidance and suggestion, they say, oh, no, that's not what I meant this. Oh, and I meant this, and I meant this, right? So even though the state has a broad police power to regulate aesthetics under the auspices of preserving property values, when they do so, they have to do it with specificity. Otherwise, it runs into the 14th Amendment's void for vagueness doctrine. Right? So we have two concepts, right? It's true. When the government wants to regulate property values, they can set standards for aesthetics. That part's true. But in doing so, they're constrained by the 14th Amendment and need to make the specifications precise. Now, not like saying you need to have this color and this number of feet and this or that. You can have more general guidelines. But you can't do what happened in the Washington case, where they have basically 100,000 different understandings of what reasonable looks like. That is not going to cut it. Okay, so questions before we get started on this introduction? Questions before we get started? All right. Oh, yes.
So the question for today, when you say that you can do something, you're assuming that it's in all possible scenarios. It's not just sometimes it's allowed, it's just in absolute.
Yeah, that's what true means. Truth is truth. Yeah. I don't need to put always in there. If it's a true statement, it's a true statement. Yeah, Rob.
I always thought the word reasonable was kind of vague, but that seems.
Well, I think you're right. Right? What does reasonable mean? I was going to ask this later. I'll ask it now. Those are my questions lined up for later. What's reasonable? You said the reasonable man standard, right, or reasonable person standard in contracts or torts, whatever, right? What's reasonable?
It seems to always sort of be a judgment for the fact finder. I don't even know how to answer the question still.
Do you ever think about this? What reasonable means? Yeah.
Isn't reasonable what other people would do? So in the same way that this case comes out, how the other houses looked, that's what's reasonable.
So it's reasonable what everyone else is doing, but not you.
Not doing, but what they would do in that situation.
Maybe they're being unreasonable. Maybe you're the reasonable one. Sure.
I believe that all the time. But
yeah. Everyone else is being unreasonable except for me, right? So you tell your mom, whatever.
I just imagined it would be in a certain fact scenario, like case-by-case basis on what's actually happening with that case. What would the normal, everyday person do in that situation?
And how's a judge to know that? How is a judge supposed to know? Judges are cloistered in their chambers. They have life tenure in some cases, right? How are they possibly supposed to know what the common man thinks?
Don't know.
Jesse?
A lot of time their objective determination is subjective.
Well, like what? With aesthetics, what are the objective determinations?
Well, aesthetics alone, as you said, you have to look at how it affects people in the community, whether it's under the general welfare aspect of the police.
So something new pisses off a neighbor. That's unreasonable. Because basically everything new is always going to make someone mad, right? Whenever you change anything, someone is going to be upset. That's just the nature of humanity, right? People like things to stay the same. And when someone wants to build a new thing, this new neighbor on the block, is that unreasonable?
I'm sure they use a totality of circumstances approach, but in the end it is their subjective understanding of if it's an appliance of social norms.
So, I mean, this is a question not just for property law. I mean, you study this in common law for sure. Like, is this law reasonable? Does it impose an unreasonable restraint on personal liberty? One of the reasons I love teaching property in common law is there's a lot of overlap. It's the same question, right? Does this impose an arbitrary restraint on a person's property rights or liberty interests? They're the same questions, and judges bring to bear a lot of stuff in making that decision. You can call totality of the circumstances whatever you want, but there are seldom any sort of objective criteria. They just don't exist. And that's a part of our legal system that law students often just gloss over, but it's a very critical part, especially if you're the lawyer representing the person who wants to build, and you're trying to persuade some zoning board that your construction is reasonable, and someone else's isn't. And if they disagree with you, there's not much recourse. So let's do the first case. Okay? Christina, can you give me the facts, please, in the first case? State ex rel Stoyanoff versus Berkeley. Missouri, 1970.
Yes, so the property owner applied for a permit to the architectural board to build his home.
Okay, and we have the picture here, right? Christina, how would you describe this property, please?
Modern and different.
Modern and different. Why do you say modern and different?
Modern got geometric shapes as opposed to homes.
Yeah.
It's different in house.
Yeah, this reminds me of the house on, I think it's on Buffalo Speedway. You know what I'm talking about? Right by Bryce Village?
Arbitrator.
Yep. And yeah, the Darth Vader. But everyone knows, some people have seen it? Yeah, it kind of looks like that a little bit. It's very modern, and Christine, does it match the neighboring properties at all?
No, neighboring properties are more colonial.
Thank you, very good. So the guy wanted to build a house with a very modern approach, and all the neighboring properties were more traditional. Now, the question is, how did this case come about? Before we get much further, the name of the case is State Ex Rel Stoyanoff versus Berkeley. Does anyone know what Ex Rel means? Ex Rel? Bradley? Oh, good, very good. On behalf of. So, what does it mean to have State Ex Rel Stoyanoff? What does that actually mean?
That Stoyanoff is like suing on behalf of the state.
Very good. Who's Stoyanoff?
Some random person.
Well, a little bit more than a random person. Who do you think brought this case?
The person that's upset about them.
Yeah, which is probably who?
The neighbor.
Yeah, the neighbor. Okay, very good. So, what actually happens under law is, under Missouri law, the neighbor can bring the suit on behalf of the state. So Stoyanoff is actually a neighbor who's unhappy with this new construction, right? So this isn't the state of Missouri cracking down on this. It's actually the neighbor who's annoyed that this thing's going to be in their neighborhood. And then Berkeley is actually the guy who wants to build the house. So that's who Stoyanoff is. That's who Berkeley is. Okay. So Mia, they submit this plan for this, spaceship-looking house, right, with these angles and columns and windows, all this weird stuff. What happens?
They deny his plans. For
How
the
come?
house.
What rationale was given when they denied the permit?
They're saying that it doesn't promote the health and general welfare of the city of Ladue.
Yeah. So what was the phrase, or what description did they give to this property?
Oh, a monstrosity of grotesque design.
Monstrosity of grotesque design. My God, what the hell does that mean? Monstrosity of grotesque design. Wow, that's serious. I'm asking you.
I mean, I guess they just thought it was really ugly.
Yeah, well, but they use such vivid language, a monstrosity of grotesque design. Mia, if you were the architect who designed that, how do you think you'd respond to that sort of thing?
Yeah, my feelings would be hurt.
Yeah! I mean, I bet there was some architect that paid a lot of money to draw together this plan, and he's probably, this modern architect, builds museums, whatever else. Oh, build this beautiful house, right? And then these zoning people come like, no, that's a monstrosity of grotesque design. Okay, fine. The permit was denied. So there was a challenge to the ordinance, right? And they argue that the ordinance is unconstitutional because it's vague, and that it provides no standards to the architectural board. And they also argue that the statute doesn't give the city the power to impose aesthetic designs, right? So there are two separate issues. One issue is whether these standards are vague or precise enough, and the second issue is, does the city even have the power in the first place to regulate aesthetics? Right? So Taylor, what's going on here? What does the court do?
Well, the court first says that they connect us with the fact that it's devaluing the property. So they connect that with general welfare.
And that's the answer to the first question of the day, right? If it was just aesthetics by itself, they couldn't do it under the law. But Taylor, what happens when you are linking together aesthetics and property value? What does that get you to?
General welfare.
Bingo. And the property, I'm sorry, I think Delilah said this a few minutes ago, the police power allows protection for general welfare. So the court sidesteps here the entire question of whether aesthetics alone is enough, because they, wait a minute, they're not regulating aesthetics just for the appearance sake, right? They're regulating the aesthetics because it can help to protect the property values of the city. And I think a few of you said it before, if property values diminish, people may flee the neighborhood, and that will diminish the tax base. And then the schools will suffer, and then businesses will leave, right? And then all these other these monstrosities, horrible things will happen if they build this stupid house, right? Does anyone believe that's actually going to happen? Probably not, right? If this house is built, after a week, people get used to it. It's like, all right, whatever. But they said, we don't want this to happen. Why should we have to take the risk? So the court, basically, the Supreme Court of Missouri, upholds this decision, right? They uphold this decision because of the close fit between the property values and the aesthetics. Okay. And in answer to the question before, there's no requirement of certainty, right? Let's say it turns out that this house would actually increase property values. It doesn't have to be the case. It just is possible that it may decrease the values of property. Okay. All right, so any questions on that case? Yes, ma'am.
So does this neighborhood not have an
HOA, tell us what that is, please.
Homeowners association.
Homeowners association. What's a homeowners association?
So I think basically everyone in the neighborhood has kind of signed with their rights.
Now, is a homeowners association a government institution or a private institution? It's a private institution. And how generally are properties bound by an HOA? We've studied this before. Covenants, exactly, right? You see this deed restricted community. The reason why homeowners associations exist is that properties on the division have signed a covenant, and they restricted it. I think, Anna, you're right. I doubt there was an HOA for this neighborhood. Because if there was an HOA, are there any constitutional limitations on what they can do? That's right, exactly right. With an HOA, they can set whatever insane standards, whatever vague and nebulous standards for appearance they want, because private actors are not bound by the 14th Amendment. They don't have to worry about the police power. They can do whatever they want. Why? Because it's a voluntary transaction. You willingly bought a piece of property that was subject to a covenant. You didn't have to, right? But you bought a property subject to a covenant. In contrast here, this ordinance applied to everyone in the city of Ladue, Missouri, whether or not they agreed to it. So when you have state action, you're dealing with the 14th Amendment. You have limitations on voice of agents on that. But when you're dealing with private actors like an HOA, the 14th Amendment is not applicable, and they can impose whatever restraints they want. A very good question. Any other questions on the first case? Anything else? All right, let's do the second case. The second case is from a town called Issaquah, Washington, which is not too far from Seattle. Lane, what happened here? Actually, I have the Google map of Gilman Boulevard, or beloved Gilman. You can actually see what it looks like. It's not what you expected. There it is. That's beloved Gilman Avenue. There's the Shell gas station. There's the tire shop, right? There's another gas station, and this is actually where they want to build the construction. So it's this beautiful stretch of road. Go ahead, Lane. What were the facts here?
Okay, so Bruce Anderson, he wanted to develop a Issaquah that he owns.
Yeah. What do you want to? What did he want to build there?
The commercial.
Yeah, he wanted to build a store, right? Commercial store, exactly right.
And so, in order to develop the land, he had to submit the plans to the board, I guess, whatever the board's called.
Very good. Yeah, the zoning board. Very good.
And to get, he wanted to get the building design approved.
Good.
But they denied it like 3 times.
Well, we're going to go through this a little more specific, but you're right. So you have Mr. Anderson. He applies for a permit to build a commercial facility on Gilman Boulevard in Issaquah, Washington. It was zoned for general commercial use. Everything was going fine, right? He was getting all of his permits until he asked the Development Commission for a permit to build a specific design. Now, Emma, what kind of things did the ordinance look for, the actual law in effect? Like, what were the standards given to Mr. Anderson that he would have to deal with? Forgetting what the commissioner said, what did the actual law say?
It said that the building structure should be made compatible with the basic buildings.
Good.
By such means as screens and site breaks or other suitable methods of material.
What does that mean? Yeah, does anyone know what that actually means? Screens and site breaks? Anyone know what the heck they're talking about? I'm sorry?
Is that space between properties?
Yeah, so basically it's using different visual features to make it look like it's more spread out, like so that you don't see things so close together. So if there's like a garbage can, right, you cover it up, right, with some sort of like a fence or something. And if there's like, you know, a lot of space between that, you put like a little tree between to make the space look bigger. These are different architectural techniques to deceive a person looking at, to make it look like it's not so congested, right? The standard gives other things. For example, you have to have harmonious colors. I don't know what a harmonious color is. You have to have exterior lighting. Monotony of design must be avoided, but it must be have a relationship to its natural setting. So think about that for a minute. You have to avoid monotony, but it has to fit in with the surrounding area. Let me say that again. You have to avoid monotonous design, but it has to fit in with the stuff around it. I don't know how to do that. It seems mighty impossible. Lindsay, are you raising your hand?
Oh, no.
But does that seem impossible to you?
Sorry, I was not listening. I was reading the board.
I appreciate your candor. I love honesty. That's okay. I'm glad you're reading something. But I think Lindsay would have said, yes, it's impossible. Right? How could you at the same time be monotonous, but also not monotonous, but consistent with what's around it? So basically, they're setting people up to fail, right? I mean, it's like me telling you, do what everyone else is doing, but be unique, right? Yeah. Fit in, but be unique. Okay, you know, I don't know how to do that. But in any event, the Anderson, he hired an architect, and he put together a construction with white stucco and a blue metal roof. So let's Bradley, let's do this one at a time, because this is a fairly long out, strewn out fact pattern. What was the first encounter with this planning commission like? What was their first round of objections?
Well, they were upset about the color.
They were upset. What about the color did they not like?
It wasn't compatible with Issaquah.
Yeah, right. What does it mean for a color not be compatible with the Issaquah?
I don't know.
Good. Yeah, you're not wrong. Yeah, I don't know either. I thought this case a number of times. I'm still not sure exactly what they meant. But they said the facade, the exterior, did not fit in with the surrounding area. That concerns about the color. So they gave him a chance to modify his design. Now, this isn't like, maybe when your professor, marks up your legal writing memo and then you go make some changes and submit it. Architects have a lot of work to build something, and they can't just scratch out one thing. They have to more or less redo the plan from the beginning. It's a lot of work, and it's not cheap. So Anderson came back with an opportunity to modify it. He changed the roof, he changed the color, he added some brick, he put some trim on it. So Samrita, what happened next after the second go round?
They pretty much picked on it again and said it's still not traditional enough or conforming enough to the rest.
Yeah, and they said, look, the color, the shade of blue is not right. Drive up and down the street to see what to expect. All right, let's read one more. He submitted a third plan, right? What happened after the third plan was submitted?
I think one of the commissioners said that he actually did go drive up and down the street, and he said that if you go and look at it, then it's still not conforming to it, but he'd already changed enough
or what he says is enough, but they still pretty much like, no, for aesthetic reasons.
Yeah, that's right. So they submitted a third blueprint for the plan, and they said, no, you're not following our direction. You need sculptures, benches, and fountains, right? This is like a store. I don't know what the hell they're talking about, sculptures and benches, right? They said, drive up and down the street, and it needs major changes. And they said, oh, we'll put this, and nothing worked. This is our signature street. And they put this lengthy statement in the record where he said, these are my subjective feelings. All right, it's about the feels, right? The subjective feelings of what they think. And ultimately, after all this, and spending, I think, 9 months and $250,000, and this was like 20 years ago, that's a lot of money. 9 months and $250,000, the permit was denied. They say we need to preserve the aesthetic value, right? So in the previous case, the first case, the court upheld this sort of aesthetic denial because of property values. But here the court comes out, I think, a little bit differently. Alex, what goes on here with the Washington case?
Let's see. Oh, is this where they talked about how harmonious?
I'm sorry, what word?
How harmonious?
Harmonious, yeah.
Yeah, I can't say it.
That's okay.
They said that that's like too vague.
Yeah, exactly. This is what we discussed earlier, right? This is this doctrine, void for vagueness. And they say, if you look at this statute, right, it has to be harmonious but not monotonous, right? It gives a reasonable person, or maybe a reasonable architect, very little guidance of what to do. So as a result, because of this void for vagueness, it violates the due process clause. It is arbitrary and discretionary, right? And in fact, you don't even need the 14th Amendment. The state of Washington has a statute that says you have to have a law that a person doesn't have to guess at, right? They don't have to pretend they know what the meaning is. It should be specific. Now, the important point here, though, is this regime is unconstitutional, right? Because it's so vague. But Natalie, can the government draft a zoning code based on aesthetics that survives constitutional scrutiny?
Yes, if they tie it to the police power.
No. We're always talking here about police power and the property values, right? They say that you can regulate aesthetics to promote property values. But the question I'm asking is this: what sort of aesthetic code can be drafted to avoid these vagueness problems? That's the question.
One that gives guidance to the commission so they have an objective way to view the application.
Okay, good. That's my question. What sort of specific guidance can be provided that would meet constitutional scrutiny?
One that's more specific. I don't know.
Good. Yeah, Philip, you want to take a step?
Something like the maximum or minimum floor plan size, or like how many stories it can be, and like the style, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, just speculate. It's not necessarily the case, but what kind of guidance would tell someone, instead of saying harmonious colors, what could they do instead?
Give them like a range of colors.
Yeah, like if you're going to Home Depot, right, the swatches of paint, right? Say, pick one of these swatches. Oh, so that way you don't have a situation where the architect is trying to imagine what kind of color, is this blue too light? Is this blue too dark? Right? Like, Phil, what else could be done other than colors? Like, what kind of specific guidelines could be used that a person knows?
They could say maybe like no, I don't know, bay windows, or like
Yeah.
little guidelines.
Yeah, I think the big problem here was that he wanted floor-to-ceiling windows, right? If you go to a store, they have floor-to-ceiling windows. They didn't want that. So have it say a window can take up no more than 40% of a wall, right? You can measure that. Or maybe the exterior must be brick of a certain color, right? Okay, that means no stucco on the exterior. So what the court's basically saying here is you can draft, right? You can draft an aesthetics code, but it has to be precise. And you have to give people some knowledge. And that's the holding of the case, right? When you have a vague standard that no one can know, they have to guess at it, that's unconstitutional. But if you give the people something specific, here's a range of colors to use. These sorts of materials are permissible, right? That's okay. And even though it might make Mr. Anderson's life more difficult, he can get it on the first try and not have to go back with 3 or 4 proposals to guess at it. Okay? But that's just a statute itself. Also think about its enforcement. When you have these architects on this commission, they need to give people specific guidance, right? They can't keep moving the ball, right? They can't say, here's my subjective feeling of what this neighborhood makes me feel, right? That is not going to work. Right, so the whole thing in this case, and I think this is a good case, is aesthetics by themselves are not enough to fall in the police power. You need to connect aesthetics to preservation of property values, which is within the general welfare. But even then, when regulating aesthetics, you have to take careful accounting of specificity, such that it's not void for vagueness, right? Architects need to know in advance what the rules are. And think about it, this guy spent $250,000. He's not getting that back, right? Even if he builds his structure in the end, he lost out all the money of the various blueprints and iterations. Oh, you did the inflation? Yeah. Thank you very much. Yes, almost $500,000.
I'm sorry.
No, I do the same thing.
I wanted to know.
Thank you. It's almost $500,000 in present day value. Yes, Bradley.
Can you imagine a scenario or something that he could sue under to get that back?
No. Unfortunately, you can't sue the government for making your life difficult, right? You can't recover for the various fees you put in. You might get attorney's fees. I mean, lawyers always get paid. Architects don't. So I suspect in this litigation, the government may actually pay fees for having to put him through this, but I doubt he'll recoup his his architect fees. But good thought. I like where you're heading with that.
Oh yeah, that's true.
He did. Well, I'll put it a little differently. I think the wait a second, Anna. I think the 3 members of this board probably didn't like him very much, and they didn't want him to open it up there, so they kept moving the goalposts. Right? Said, oh, do this, do this, do this. Oh no, you have to go back to square one. Did they actually expect him to go back to square one? Probably not. They thought he would just go away or build it somewhere else. So there's something very perverse when a government official doesn't have the power to tell you no, so instead they just make your life miserable hoping you go away. There's something very unsettling about that. I think that's what's happening here. Like, maybe the architects were just saying, you know what, I want to have a certain appearance in mind, but when they keep shifting the rules and this, after a while it looks like they're just making the guy go away. I think that's probably right. Yeah, Bradley?
It's the whole green space thing from, Tuesday, about making a park a little slit of grass.
Yeah, oh yeah, right. So what Bradley's asking about is the methadone link I gave in class last week, I have no idea what day I am, but the methadone clinic case, right, where they just don't want something to be built and they'll just mess with the zoning laws to make it there, right? Or the adult bookstore also, right, where there was an announcement for a plan to build an adult bookstore, and then suddenly they just make these brand new laws and you can't build an adult bookstore here. It's fairly common. Anna, patiently waiting.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, I feel like not being able to recover these costs is a big blow because, I mean, no one would be able to challenge these kind of regulations if it's having an injury, right?
Yeah.
And so doesn't it prevent, like,
Yes.
statutes from being challenged?
Yeah, I mean, so fortunately after this case, there was a facial challenge that statute's no longer enforced. But until this guy actually has to be denied a permit, right, he's going to challenge it. And I actually want to be precise. Anna, did they ever deny his permit?
No.
No. You notice what they did, right? This is actually very crafty. These people are not idiots. Once you deny the permit, you can go to court and sue. So Anna, what did they do instead of denying the permit? They asked for revisions. So I want everyone to appreciate that, right? If they just come out on the first version and said denied, stamp, denied, right? He goes right to court and sues. They can do that. They strung him along 1 month, 2 months, right? no, change this, change this, change this, then 9 months elapsed. And they said, no, we're not denying a permit, just go back and reconsider it. So I think there was actually an argument that this case was not yet ripe. You know, like a piece of fruit is not ripe yet, that's determined courts. Unless the case is ready for suit, courts shouldn't do it. So I can imagine the city lawyer said, listen, just don't deny this guy, just keep extending, and revision 3, 4, 5, 7, whatever, right? So there's actually a little bit of a difficulty with this case. Maybe there might be a wrinkle in Washington law that allows these suits to be brought prematurely, but I can see the court saying, well, you haven't been denied yet. Try revising it one more time. Maybe it's going to work. Yeah. Is it going to work? Of course not. But he had the opportunity. Any more questions in the second case? Anything else? Yeah, this case makes students very angry. I don't know why. More than most, right? Some of you angry reading this, like, right? I don't know. In this case, every year, students get very upset about it. Okay, I think it's a case where there's just absolute unfairness to the architect in this building. Okay. Anything else? All right. There's some interesting and worthwhile notes in the after this case. I'll just mention a few of them. So one question is this, right? Do architects like these laws or not? Kayla, do you think architects like these laws? These sorts of, like the law they had in Washington? Issaquah? Okay, why do you say no?
Because it makes their job more difficult. They're just going to
Well, let me ask the question like this. Do you think all architects dislike this law?
No.
Ah. What kind of architects do you think like this law?
Really interesting.
More really boring, right? So let me ask the question like this. Is that Walker? Right?
Yes, sir.
Walker, let me ask you this question, sir. If, let's say, okay, so you want to build something on Gilman, right? You want to build a property on Gilman next door. And you just know all this stuff happened, right? You know that this went through the courts, and you know these same 3 guys are on the zoning commission, right? They didn't learn their lesson. If you're smart, are you going to hire the same architect that Anderson hired?
No.
No, you're not. Which architect are you going to hire?
A boring architect.
Probably a boring architect. Maybe what about the architect would be significant?
If they have developed stuff in the
Where?
surrounding area.
Yes. What you're going to do is pick an architect who was successfully built on Gilman. Or maybe stated a little differently, who's friends with the architects of the board. Right? So what these sorts of laws breed is conformity. Right? The sort of architect that you're going to hire is going to be similar to what's already been improved in that neighborhood. And that just reinforces conservative, not like Republican, but like conservative traditional design. And it truly inhibits the development of any sort of new, innovative designs. You're basically stuck in the past. So if you're an architect who's boring, right, and does the same stuff as before, or if you're an architect who's friends with the developer on these commissions, right, the development commissions, you're probably going to get through. But if you go hire someone like maybe Frank Lloyd Wright, who's one of those famous architects of the 20th century, who developed places like Fallingwater. If you ever go to Pittsburgh, it's a beautiful place, right? These sorts of things would just never be built because they're different, and they can diminish property value because they're, grotesque, and I don't know. There's a fascinating property. If you ever go to Western Pennsylvania, he actually built the house on top of a waterfall. The waterfall goes through the house. There's a thing, the turbines that need power. It's an amazing structure. But these sorts of things have never been possible. All right, so questions on that? Questions on that? All right, anything else? Okay, we'll move on. The next case concerns the First Amendment and free speech. And you might be asking yourself, Josh, why are we learning about the First Amendment in property? In fact, you and I even learn about the First Amendment in common law. If we do, it'll be very brief. Is your First Amendment? Briefly, yeah. I only give a day for it in common law. The reason why is that a significant number of land use cases involve free speech and also free religion, so you actually have to learn it here. All right, let's try this. Thomas, what is speech?
What is speech?
Well, content neutral and...
Whoa! Content neutral? No, my question is much more basic.
What? The act of projecting an idea.
Projecting an idea using what?
Anything.
Anything? Give me an example.
Okay, well...
I'm trying to dodge my hypo, but it's fine. I'll narrow you right down.
So you could put a flag that represents like the gay community, the rainbow flag.
Okay.
And although that's not words, but having
So
that
symbols
flag, it's a
can be
symbol.
speech.
Yeah.
Okay. What about architecture?
Yes.
I have this beautiful house built in a waterfall as a symbol of environmentalism, how you can coexist one with nature, right? That's my message.
I think that's speech.
Okay, Jared, is he right? What do courts say about this?
About speech? Well, speech is, you have to have a message. There has to be a conveyance of a message, and you have to have a recipient that understands that message. If you understand the message, then there's no speech.
Ah. Okay. John Paul. The First Amendment states that Congress should make no law, virtually freedom of speech. That's what it says. No law. From your recollection, at least from common law, as best you recall, how do courts go about assessing restrictions on speech?
Whether the government employs somebody to take on the message of somebody or prevent them from reporting.
Right. So the government prevents them from speaking, and then how do courts decide if that's if that law is legal?
Whether the conduct that they're preventing them from doing is expressive or likely to be expressive.
What's expressive speech?
Expressive speech could be conduct, actions, or words that convey some sort of message.
So, Jonathan, is adult dancing, strip club, if you will, is adult dancing speech? Can the government, if the government passed a law restricting strip clubs as part of the zoning, right? You cannot zone a strip club in this city anywhere, it's gone.
I think you could say it's speech.
Is dancing speech?
May it be a form of expression.
So what if the dancing is without clothes? I'm asking for a reason, I promise.
Well, like kind of doing.
There have actually been strip clubs that perform Shakespeare nude, right? It's probably not good, but there are actually been cases where adult clubs have put on performances of Shakespeare with music and stuff, right? But the point is, I think if we take Thomas's definition, anything that conveys a message of speech, then adult dancing would fall under that. The reason why I'm putting through these paces is generally the zoning laws are subject only to the 14th Amendment, right? The police power is very broad. So unless you have a very vague standard, the government can do whatever it wants. But there's another limitation on the police power. Not just the 14th Amendment, the First Amendment. And if a zoning law runs afoul of the freedom of speech, then it falls outside the police power and is unconstitutional. So we'll study today restrictions on zoning that are implicated by free speech. And we'll study in class on, I think next week, restrictions imposed by the free exercise of religion, right? These are actually very big cases. Like every couple of years, the Supreme Court has a case involving signs, right? Signs, not like signs from God, but like, signs on the side of the road, right? Can a city ban signs? So, Robert, let's go to you now. Why are governments so insistent on banning signs, whether put on a lawn, or in a window, or in a person's shop, or maybe on a billboard? Why? What's the big deal about signs?
If we drop in the case, they're worried about clutter.
Clutter? What's clutter?
Just that it doesn't look as good.
Right, but why is a sign so problematic?
On a general point, obviously it just makes people mad.
Why would a sign make someone mad?
If people say that I'm for this Persian Gulf War or something like that.
Well, now, you just gave two different rationales, my friend, right? You first said something about clutter, and then you said something about the sign making someone mad. Which one is it?
I think we should explicit.
Explain yourself.
I think both, like a government can take both of those perspectives.
Okay, so here we have a fairly common aspect of law where the government takes an action and there's a good reason for it, getting rid of clutter, right? And then Robert says perhaps a not so good reason for it, which is they don't like anti-war messages. Right? There's a good reason and a bad reason. It's an economics concept that I always like to explain to my students. What's called the Baptist and Bootlegger Coalition. Did I ever mention this before? Anyone know what this is? Isaac. Oh, you were in my class twice before. Give it to me.
Baptists and bootleggers colluded in the pre-prohibition era to get the prohibition statute amendment passed. The Baptists wanted it for moral purposes, and the bootleggers wanted it for economic purposes, because when you make anything scarce, black market will pop up and allow you to make a lot more money. So even though their interests were aligned, even though their motives were wrong.
Very good. So who supports prohibition, right? The criminalization of alcohol. Well, on the one hand, you have the Baptists, right? And they want to ban alcohol because it's sinful. They have a good moral reason. Who else supports prohibition? The bootleggers, right? Because once you have prohibition, the price of alcohol goes up. You have a black market, as Isaac mentioned. So, is anyone here from a dry county? No one? On the border of your county, what is there?
Liquor stores.
A lot of liquor stores right on the other side of the county line, right? Do you know why those stores are there?
They know they're going to get everyone from the tribe.
Now, do you know why your county's still dry? By 20, I guess.
Run by the Baptist churches.
In coalition with?
The city.
The bootleggers. So I'm sure that the liquor stores right on the border lobby to keep that dry county in place. This is a very common aspect of governance, right? Where you have different people supporting laws for different motives. So Robert jumped in maybe 5 minutes. My question goes quite good, right? There is a thing about clutter, right? Having lots of signs on the road might be distracting to drivers. You ever drive around the Woodlands? There are not many signs there, right? You just don't see them. They're not billboards. There are these little signs by the side of the road for like gas stations even. Distraction can be formed from clutter. But in this case, in the Ladue case, there was probably another reason why this ordinance was designed, to stop people from putting political messages in their window. So how do you know if this is a law designed to eliminate clutter, which I think is a good reason, no distractions, or how do you know if this is a law designed to stifle, shut down, protected political speech? Right? That's the question presented in the Ladue case. So Essa, you want to give me the facts, please?
A resident of Ladue puts a sign up saying, say no to war in the Persian Gulf.
And for those who weren't alive yet, this will happen increasingly, there was a war in the Persian Gulf in the early 1990s. It was a fairly brief war, but it was one of many. So just that's the frame. So go ahead.
And then it's dissing she puts the sign
It's
back
missing.
up.
What happened to the sign?
It's taken. And
Someone
then,
stole it.
and then she puts another one up. It gets knocked down. She calls the police. Police inform her that it's violating the ordinance.
Can you imagine, right? Let's just stop you right there, right? You put a sign in your lawn, right, to say, stop war. Someone steals your sign, knocks it over. You call the cops. The cops are like, you're breaking the law. Just think about that for a minute, right? All right, go ahead, Essie. Yeah, so
so she calls. There's an ordinance that states that residents may not. There's a limitation of what they may put up on signs for identifying or for sale and stuff like that. For commercial use, though, they can put up whatever type of signs that they want.
Right.
And then she files an action, and she gets a temporary injunction for the ordinance.
Good.
And then the city responds and states that it's for safety and clutter and stuff like that.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Essie. So, the original ordinance, right? The original ordinance allowed commercial speech, right, a for sale sign, but not political speech, right? Virginia, what's problematic about that sort of law? Why is that just screams bad stuff?
Because you're specifically targeting one aspect of speech instead of it being the entire thing. So it's too specific because it's excluding an entire portion of it.
Of personal speech, right? Because then Virginia will ask for the follow-up question. They repealed that first ordinance. They put in a second one, right? And this one prohibits no new signs, right? So we keep your old signs, but no new signs. And they say signs that create visual ugliness, blight, clutter, impair property values, or safety hazards are not allowed. Virginia, what's then problematic about this new ordinance?
Was it because there was exemptions for the churches and
Okay, very good.
Sorry about it.
Very good, very good. So there's this concept in the First Amendment that's a little bit counterintuitive, and this opinion does a very bad job explaining it, so I'll try and do better than Joseph Stevens. I think I can do it. Let's say, that's not this. Okay, Justin, let's say you have a law that says signs are prohibited except for commercial businesses and churches. Right? That's what the ordinance says. You can't have any signs unless it's for commercial businesses or churches. What sort of message does that law signal? That says no signs except for commercial businesses and churches. What does that signal to the public?
That that's what's important.
Yes, exactly. And what if you want to put up an anti-war sign? Does that fall within the categories? So what does that say about anti-war? What's
limiting that type of speech?
Exactly. So when the government creates these sort of exceptions, right? You can have any sign you want. I'm sorry, you can't have any sign except for commercial or churches. Make an example. That signals that only those forms of speech are favored. And anything other than that is disfavored by the government. Right? So there's this weird concept that even when the government's allowing more speech by creating these exemptions, the fact that it creates these exemptions shows its true purpose. Right? If you had a law, say Atlanta, let's say you had a law that said no signs, period. Right? No signs, period. Is that law better or worse than what I mentioned a moment ago to Justin?
I would say it's better.
Well, how's it better?
I mean, it's still constraining speech, but
Yeah.
I guess it's fair because it's constraining all speech.
Right. So they're both problematic for different reasons, right? Under the statute I gave to Justin, it's saying we prefer this speech over that speech. But under the statute I gave to Elena, no one can speak. So neither of them are good, right? Both of them will be unconstitutional. The former because it's too specific, and the latter because it's too broad. This is what Justice Stevens was trying to explain, and I think did a good job doing it. Okay? When you restrict too much speech, it's unconstitutional. When you restrict too little speech, it's also unconstitutional. It's like Goldilocks, right? You have to get it just right. And how do you get it just right? You have to illustrate, you have to demonstrate that your reason for including some speech, but excluding others, is not content neutral. Let me say that again. That your reasons for including some speech, but excluding others, is not based on the content. Everyone see that? So Hanan, in this context, is this regime content neutral? Right? Is this law content neutral? The final ordinance that we're talking about. Good. Why is it not content neutral? How do we know that? Yeah. It allowed some kinds of speech, religious in nature for a church, right? But it did not allow political speech. And this is particularly problematic. Because the type of speech being restricted is political nature. And the Supreme Court has long held that political speech about war, government, whatever, is at the core of the First Amendment, right? The core of the First Amendment is political speech. Right? This statute eliminates that. Right? And Lindsay, what's particularly important or unique about a sign you put in your window, right? Why does the court put so much weight in the fact that there's a sign in the window?
They were saying signs convey a special message and it identifies the speaker, and that's more persuasive.
Yeah, what does that mean the sign identifies the speaker? Why is a lawn sign or a sign in your window so unique?
Well, they gave the example of if there's like a army general who has an anti-war sign out in his front yard, that's going to be very persuasive because usually the army general would be for war. I don't really know.
No, you're exactly right. The answer is this, right? It's the cheapest way to convey a message. By the way, this was 1990 something. There was no internet, right? There was no Twitter. There was no Facebook. You couldn't gain 15,000 followers posting cat gifs, right? It didn't work like that. It's true. So at the time, the most effective way to convey a message was to put a sign in your window, or to put a sign on your lawn. Even today, if you ever go around election time, maybe around primary time in Houston at least, drive up and down the street. Every house with a lawn sign is there for a reason, right? These are not just for funsies, right? They're there to convey a message that I, person who lives here, support candidate X. Bradley's hand up? So this is the reason why the court put so much weight in this. And the fact that they allow some sorts of commercial signs but not others suggests that their real motivation here was to punish Mrs. Gilleo. And again, we have the same deal. Neighbor does something, the government doesn't like it, they shut her down. She sues, they change the law, try and shut her down again. This is the same pattern as the methadone clinic, happens over and over again. These ordinances happen fairly quickly. Okay? Bradley.
When we're talking about this changing the goalpost stuff, is this stuff also, is it more prevalent in smaller
Yes.
areas?
Why? Why is it more prevalent in smaller governments?
Well, there's going to be less exposure.
Well,
And people
yeah,
aren't gonna know
you're thinking
it.
like a little very good, but beyond there being less financial exposure, what else? Why else might these sort of local governments have moved faster and quicker to shut this stuff down? What about local government makes it very conducive to this sort of reactionary legislation?
Everybody tends to have the same ideals,
And what else?
expectations, beliefs.
What am I thinking of? How often can laws be passed in Austin, our state capital? Every 2 years, right? What about local laws?
Every week.
Basically, yeah. So statewide governments are somewhat slow, not responsive, right? We have a part-time legislature here in Texas. City councils can have emergency meetings whenever they want. And if they find out that a strip club's coming to town, or an adult bookstore, or that this peacenik is putting a war sign in a window, they hold an emergency meeting and they can pass an ordinance in one day. So the answer to Bradley's question is this. local governments are more likely to do this stuff because one, they have jurisdiction over zoning, that's their thing, but two, they all hold the same opinions generally, because they live together, and they can react quickly. Right? So the holding then, right? The holding of the second case is this. When you have a law that allows some speech but not others, it creates a presumption that this was done to punish the other types of speech. It favors the former and disfavors the latter. And that's a content-based restriction under the First Amendment, and it's unconstitutional. Okay? Everyone okay with that? All right. There was one other case which is mentioned in the notes. I want to talk about it briefly. It's called City of Renton versus Playtime Theaters. It's mentioned briefly in the strip club section. City of Renton versus Playtime Theaters. Okay? What did this case do? I'll describe it. You don't have to read it. It's fine. I got it. What did this case do? It was a Seattle ordinance that limited adult theaters, that is, strip clubs, to a very small percentage of the city's real estate. In other words, it relegated all of the adult theaters into a certain area. Now, Megan, how can the government get away with this, right? If you have a law that only applies to certain types of theaters, adult ones, how is that not a content-based restriction? It's saying you can put a movie theater wherever you want, a ballet theater wherever you want, but if you have adult dancers, or not clothed, right, you have to put it in a specific part of town. How is that not a content-based restriction, right, under Ladue?
Because it applies to all of them.
I'm sorry?
Because it applies to all of them.
No? Anthony, what do you think it said?
Time, place, and manner restriction.
Okay, but it's still, you only get to, okay, so the standard you're talking about is in the First Amendment. The government can regulate the time, place, and manner of speech if the regulation is content neutral. I'm saying this is not content neutral, it's content-based. You want to take a stab at this? I don't think it was in your reading, but you can maybe piece it together. Albert?
I was guessing compared to your example about the case with the adult bookstore.
Yeah.
And it would draw.
Oh, yeah, that's exactly what I'm looking for. Very good, very good. So this is what's called the secondary effects doctrine. The secondary effects doctrine. The way they get around this content-based restriction by saying, we're not regulating strip clubs because of the fact that there are adult dancers in there. We are regulating strip clubs because of what they attract. The secondary effects of having this in the neighborhood. People who go to these clubs might be drunk, might be on drugs, might be criminals, might be perverts, right? Who are these people coming? We don't want them in our schools. We don't want them by our parks. So we're going to locate all of these adult clubs in the outer banks of town where they're as far away from children as possible. Okay? And as a result, even though it has a content-based restriction, the Supreme Court upheld this regime. Now, I give you this case, this renting case, because I don't think it's good law anymore. We'll do a case for class next week on Tuesday called Reed v. Town of Gilbert, which, in my reading, I think it more or less overturned Renton, but didn't quite do that publicly. But when you read the next case for next week, Reed v. Town of Gilbert, keep in mind the renting case, which is when can the government regulate based on secondary effects for signs. Okay? So any questions on that one? So if I may summarize a bit for today, the police power is very broad. It goes to health, safety, welfare, and the morals of the people. That allows them to attack aesthetic, but only under the auspices of values of property, which is subsumed within the police power and the welfare clause. But even then, there are limitations on that police power, namely, the 14th Amendment and the Due Process Clause. And the standards must be specific, they cannot be vague. The police power is also constrained by the First Amendment. And if the law is designed to punish speech on the basis of its content, that is unconstitutional. And we'll study next week, beyond the First Amendment, religion. In what cases can restrictions on zoning affect free exercise of religion? And also the right of association. Can the government say that only families who are related can live in a property? Come on down to Garrett Town, get some lunch, and see me and Kelsey have some fun. Thank you much. I'll see you all next week.